Welcome, one and all, to episode 12 of our fine, fantastic, friendship filled fun, also known as
Changing the narrative.
I am one of your fantastic hosts, Elizabeth Rouse, and I am here with my better half.
Wow, that's too kind. I am Murray Elbourn, and thanks for joining us for episode 12. Apparently, Lizzie, if we get past 10 episodes of a podcast, that is something like 70% better than most podcasts. So I'm very proud to say that we are better than 70% of podcasts.
Can we say that we're in the top 30%? Because I think that makes us sound swankier.
Yeah, top 30% of podcasts is what you're looking for right now.
I love that for us. Go team. And thank you all for helping us get to this point because if we were just sitting here screaming into the void of nothingness, we wouldn't be having nearly as much fun as we are. So pat yourselves on the back for contributing to being in the top 30% with us. We have all earned this place.
Now, I do have one point of contention, Lizzie.
Okay.
We represent different states, obviously. You
Mhm.
with Iowa and me with Washington. And I do have to say that the Washington downloads are 8 times better than or more than the the Iowa downloads. And so I think internally within your state, you need to rally the troops to be able to get some more downloads happening because 8 times more than what you've got is not so great.
I would encourage you to Google sometime the population differences between your state and my state
Here
and
we
then come back to me with your complaints.
go. Good to know.
Mhm.
Moving on. We also, by the way, we do not have any international listeners for the last download.
Oh
So
no.
our UK and Australian people, you're letting us down. I'm pretty annoyed about that, to be honest with you.
They
And
probably got sick of you bullying them over cricket.
and I think that's probably true. Cricket season's over. Actually, the T20 World Cup is about to happen. So Australia are 2 times back-to-back world champions. So I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon, unfortunately for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
But
And we're back to
but
talking smack.
and maybe we can get some new listeners across Venezuela and Greenland.
There you go. There you go. Aim high. Aim high.
Yeah.
I love it.
So today's topic, Lizzie, is
The 2026 National Federation of the Blind's Washington seminar. I am fresh off of a week of travel, and Murray has asked me to just share a little bit about my experience. It was in the middle of all the crazy weather out on the East Coast, and we still had a really great time. So, Murray, do you want me to spiel? Do you want to ask questions? How do you want to do this, my friend?
a bit of both. I think I asked Lizzie to do this topic because I think it's really prevalent right now. Human rights is a big issue in the first place, and then certainly for people with disability and blindness and low vision being one of them. I feel like a lot of people feel like they're having their rights taken away
Mhm.
and what rights withdrawn from them. And it's a topic that really we need to talk about more and put more pressure on politicians in Washington to be able to make differences and realize that there's a very big population out there that can support or can't support them, and what that is. And I have to say, NFB do a fantastic job in lobbying politicians to be able to get laws changed and to give us more choice and adaptation in what we have. But we've still got a long way to go, and coming from a country where disability is top of the pops in Australia, and they really do a good job mostly. We've got a long way to catch up, and so it's only by talking about it and educating people and educating politicians that we can start to have some equality, which is desperately needed. So, yeah, I'm really excited to hear the kind of meetings that you had, the kind of topics that you broached,
Mhm.
and any outcomes that you can talk about.
Absolutely. So I will give you kind of the view from the sky version, and then you can kind of prompt me to dig into what we think listeners might want to dig into, because I know legislation lobbying is not everyone's cup of tea. I am known to say on and off the record that Washington Seminar is far and away my favorite Federation event throughout the year. It's one of the first things that I ever got to do with the National Federation of the Blind, a junior version of Washington Seminar called the Law Conference when I was in middle school. So as far back as 14-year-old me, really kind of dug into these topics and learned what I didn't know. and how, what I could figure out could benefit blind people as a whole. Um, so I will offer, this is my ninth Washington seminar.
Wow.
I've only missed 1 year since I started going in 2017, which was my freshman year of college. And I think it's just a really invigorating experience, right? So, Washington Seminar essentially is our organization selects specific bills or matters of importance, and that varies from year to year. That could be anything from the accessibility or lack thereof of medical devices. It could be access technology and lobbying for a refundable tax credit associated with access technology, et cetera, et cetera. Right? I mean, the sky's the limit. And
Now,
we select. Go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say one
Yeah.
thing that I think is really important is, I work with a lot of transition students in my programs with Ameribility, and one thing I always tell them is to get involved young in
Yes.
NFB because, just like you just said, it gives you so many opportunities to really understand better. One, how to advocate for yourself and your community, but two, really understanding what's going on in the world and what's going on in the United States and what is important from an NFB point of view to reference blindness and low vision across the community. So I'd love for you to just to give me a couple minutes on really how that benefited you holistically in just understanding what the process is.
Yeah, I think going in, I honestly didn't know a ton about how legislation is passed into law in the United States, right? So, traditionally, you can have a bill, a piece of legislation introduced in either the House of Representatives, the Senate, or both. And those bills kind of have to collectively accumulate co-sponsorship, which means people are saying, yes, I agree with this. I am in support of this. I'm signing on, sign me up, right? And a lot of that comes from hearing from constituents. So events like Washington Seminar, where we actually, we the people get to go to Capitol Hill, we get to show people, in person, this is access technology. It doesn't have to be this thing that you Google. It's something that I can, put in your hands right now and let you see and let you feel. Really kind of materializes that hypothetical for people, right? I think a lot of folks are of the mindset, blindness doesn't touch me, it doesn't touch my life. When in actuality, if the members of Congress that we have, and the senators in Congress that we have elected into office, for better or worse, right, they need to understand their constituents. So I think a big part of Washington Seminar for me is using that part of my voice and saying, hey, I've put you in this position, or my state has put you in this position. You darn well better know we're going to expect you to do work now. I think it's taught me a lot about what questions to ask, when to speak, when to not speak. And frankly, when I'm asked a question that I don't know the answer to, how to really politely and respectfully defer either to somebody else in that room or to say, hey, I don't want to give you misinformation. I think that's a great question. I'd love to follow up with you. Right. So it really kind of teaches you that public speaking, that communication piece, that I think has really carried me through a lot of different situations in my life, whether that's interacting with my voc rehab counselor, whether that's, getting a job. There's tons of different ways that confidence presents itself. And I think that carries a lot of weight. That's my simple answer to your question.
Yeah, no, it's great. And we're talking about career building and getting jobs and advocating and all of these things that teenagers go through with an agency and then their voc rehab counselor. And I think just being more in tune with that, being more a part of state seminars and the national conference, it just gives you a better understanding of holistically what blindness really is and how to advocate and explain it to people and educate people. And we all get sick of doing it, but it's such an essential part of our everyday life. And so being informed is definitely a better way to do it.
Yes, definitely. So, speaking of that being informed piece, I think the Federation does a really nice job of equipping its members to represent blind people well, right? I mean, it's not, hey, here's our issues, read a document, go forward and conquer, right? I mean,
Right.
they provided me as Iowa's legislative director with draft emails that I could use to request these appointments with our congressional representatives and senators. On the actual Monday of Washington Seminar, I went through two different specific trainings in which I could learn about and hear some like mock meetings of folks presenting these bills, right? The good, the bad, the ugly, things that are done well, things to avoid. And then there's obviously a chance to ask some questions of not only the presenters, but also the folks who work for the National Federation of the Blind's national office for the governmental affairs team. So this year's three bills, or excuse me, three topics. The first one was not actually a bill, and this is the second year that we've actually kind of dug into this. It's a very tumultuous time in America to have a disability. And we know that protecting the pieces of law that already exist is really essential, right? Because unfortunately, once a law is set in stone, it can be repealed, it can be amended, it can be changed. So the first piece that we actually focused on this year was all about protecting different pieces of legislation related to education, employment, and independent living programs for blind people. So those are covering things like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to the Rehabilitation Act, to the Randolph Shepherd program. So it's not only digging into what these pieces are, but why they're important to different groups of people, right? Randolph Shepherd, for example, is all about blind merchants, blind entrepreneurs, blind vendors, owning and operating their own businesses inside different facilities. And some of those facilities are, armed forces bases or government buildings. So a blind person is in charge of, stocking those machines, refilling those machines, adapting to, needs and wants and desires in that community while still maintaining the full autonomy of that project. Is that something that I've done? No, but it is something that a really good friend of mine has actually recently started doing. So while I can definitely talk about the IDEA or the Rehab Act or different ways that those programs have benefited me, going and hearing those first person accounts of, people who have benefited from the Blind Enterprise Program, the BEP, it really makes a difference for me. And I'm very confident that it makes a difference for people in Congress as well. That was kind of our first large piece. The second is a fan favorite of mine. It's the Access Technology Affordability Act.
Okay, so just wait before we get back into that.
Yes.
You're on a
Yes.
roll, I know. But I also know people who have done the vendorship program and hired people with blindness to be part of that vendorship program as well. So actually, there's quite a good size employment aspect to that program that you just spoke about. And I think the repealing is very valid right now to address, because when this government came in, they put a freeze on federal funding, which affected every state's vocational rehabilitation services programs. And so basically all of the programs that I run, obviously Ameribility is a vendor business that contracts to state agencies. And in those states where I was contracted to state agencies, we were not allowed to deliver programs for 8 months. From February, well, basically February started, so the program stopped a lot in April and to December. So from April to December last year, hardly any programs were delivered to the blind and low vision transition teenagers, adults for vocational rehabilitation services, and junior under 13 groups. And that's challenging for families that really rely on those services and supports for students going through what they go through, and then people trying to get jobs and build careers, go through university and college degrees. There was no support at all in a lot of those states. And so these are real life, day-to-day things that Elizabeth is talking about. And I'm serious about it when I call her Elizabeth and not Lizzie. But just to give some added perspective about
Yeah.
how important these things are and how they impact individuals.
Yeah. And I think, that's what it's all about, Marie, is making these things tangible, right? Moving into that next piece to get back on my role, I can throw around the term access technology, and people who are not familiar with, Braille devices or screen reading software, they're going to blink dazed and confused at me and go, uh-huh, right? But if
Right.
I'm sitting next to you in a meeting and I'm typing away on my Mantis Q40 and you
Yeah.
can actually see that in action, it really makes things different. I've been known to literally say, hey, Austin, right? My congresswoman, the staffer that we met with, his name was Austin. Austin, spell your name for me, right? First and last, I just want to type it out here for you so you can actually feel your name in Braille. Because there are some people who have never felt their name in Braille before, right? It's
Yep.
just like a totally foreign concept to them.
Yep.
And if I say, okay, Austin, I'm writing down your email address so that I can follow up on these questions with you. And I just want you to know, not only am I taking my notes with this Access technology device, I'm also going to be communicating with you via email. And I cannot use my email account without a screen reader, right? So whether it's VoiceOver on my phone, whether it's JAWS on my computer, it really drives that point home for some folks. And then you bust out figures like, oh yeah, my Braille display costs almost $3,000,
Yeah.
right? People buy a MacBook and they're like, oh my Lanta, that was $1,700. Like that's a
Yeah.
big purchase for
For
people.
sure. And especially people from low incomes as well, potentially, who are struggling to get a job and living, maybe on SSI to start with. The other point to this is that really makes me annoyed is that we work in a system now that teaches Braille, which is great, right? And then makes people reliant on Braille. And then in senior year in high school, they're like, actually, you're going to go and find a job now. Braille's really not what you should learn. You should learn Fusion, or you should learn JAWS, or you should learn NVDA, or whatever screen reader you're going to use, because actually we don't have anything that's going to work with a system that uses Microsoft products in the workplace or Google products in the workplace. So now you've got to learn a completely new system, and it drives me nuts. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a big, makes me angry.
Yeah. I
That
think it's really interesting that you're tying these things together though, Murray, because right there, what you're talking about, right, are those protections under IDEA, right?
right,
So you're talking about that K-12 education. I will tell you point blank, I started learning my first screen reader when I was in the second grade.
yeah,
Like
and
I,
that's what
I think it really depends on what school system you're in and what kind
right,
of teacher you have,
right.
which
And
is
how they
why
use
having those
assistive
conversations.
technology and teach assistive technology, and there's
Yep,
such a wide gap from state to state or person to
there
person.
is. Yeah.
That these are the challenges when we're trying to work with transition youth from
Yep.
school age to jobs.
Yep.
There's so much to think about and so much to train on that it's overwhelming for the state, it's overwhelming for the individuals, and it's overwhelming for the vendors as well who work with these programs to be able to say, okay, we need to pivot and do this or do that. And I've
Yep.
got a program that I'm running right here in Nevada where one of my people would be much better on a Braille device than they would be on an iMac, but they've already got an iMac, right? So
Yep.
we need to teach with what they've got, but they don't know how to use it. And that's the other thing as well is it's not only about the assistive technology, which is really important. It's about the training, the cheat sheets, and how people are trained. In some
Yep.
schools in the country, they get one or two lessons on these things and then are expected to use them like they've had them their whole lives, and it's impractical. And so again, it takes funding to be able to do these things and create
Yep.
that equal environment. And so when we think about holistic programs and costing for holistic programs, it's these add-on things that really do cost the money to be able to teach someone properly how to use them and train someone properly.
Mhm. So let's circle back to that funding piece for a second, because that actually gets right at what the Access Technology Affordability Act advocates for, right? So let's say I'm buying a piece of equipment that for whatever reason, Voc Rehab doesn't want to buy from me. They say that they bought me something too similar, or maybe I'm not a VR client, right? Let's
Right.
be honest, there's a roughly 60% unemployment or underemployment rate in America for persons who are blind, right? So that means 6 out of 10 people are either being paid less than what they should be, or they just straight up don't have a job.
Yep.
Okay. If you come to me and you say, Elizabeth, buy this $3,000 piece of equipment, I can do that. It's not going to be comfortable for me and it's not going to be easy for me, but I can do that. I'm very blessed to be able to say that. However, what Access Technology Affordability Act advocates for is over a 3-year period of time, a person in filing their taxes could get up to a $2,000 refundable tax credit, right? So now that piece of $3,000 equipment becomes $1,000. It makes it much more manageable on the individual so that I can then use that piece of equipment to go out and get an education or get a job, to work and to pay back into the tax system. And the really rad thing that we can use, this piece of information that we can use to sell people on this bill, is there was actually an entity called Mathematica that did a detailed investigation into this bill, and it is actually proposed to save the federal government over $300 million in the next 5 years just from implementing this
That's a bit
federal tax
funny.
credit. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's
$300 million.
So this credit that you just talked about, that's not in right now, right?
It's not. It's
Yeah.
something that everyone who's listening to this podcast should write to their congressional representative and their senator, because this has actually been introduced in both the House and the Senate, to say, hey, why are we not already co-signed onto this? And or make sure you check first, because they might be. Write to them and thank them for being signed onto that piece of legislation.
And how can someone find out
Big,
if their congressman is signed on or not?
honestly, I would just do a really quick Google search. I don't know it off the top of my head. I think it's like congress.gov, and you could type in the name of the bill, which again is the Access Technology Affordability Act. And if you forget any and all of this, you can always refer back to nfb.org/Washington-seminar, right? All of our bill language is there. The bill numbers are there. Fact sheets are there. Everything that you could possibly need.
We'll put a link in the comments for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So great piece of legislation to advocate for, in your casual free time, right? Because, whether you're listening to this podcast because you think Murray and I are hilarious, or because blindness is a relevant part of your life, for yourself, for your son, for your daughter, for your mom, for your dad, for your cousin, for your dog, I don't care. It's impactful, right? Don't be afraid to elevate that concern and make it really relevant.
Yeah.
Ready for number 3?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so believe it or not, this is how you know I'm a nerd. Number 3 is my favorite. Number 3 has only been introduced in the House of Representatives to date. It's called the Blind Americans Return to Work Act. And this is addressing, for anyone who doesn't know, if you are a recipient of SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, that means you've paid a certain amount of money into the Social Security fund and you're getting a monthly check of some amount, right?
Or your parents have.
Or your parents have, yep, depending on if you've inherited that. I personally didn't, right? I was on SSDI or SSI when I turned 18. Once I worked my certain number of quarters of coverage, then I actually moved over to SSDI independent. Yeah. There is a certain number of funds, an amount of money that you can make in a month without impact to your benefits. Okay. So I'll be very transparent, right? I'm not shy about sharing this. I earn about $1,100 a month plus Medicare coverage through my Social Security disability insurance, right? 11 times 12 is a pretty big amount of money. We're looking at upwards of $13,000 ish. Yeah. Okay. I can only earn, as a blind person in America, $2,830 in a month without having an impact to my SSDI. And SSDI is different from SSI, different Social Security program, in that if you earn a literal dollar over 2,830, if you earn $2,831, you lose all of your benefits if you are past your trial work period months, which I am. Or at least I was the last time I did the math to figure out if I was. So that means $1 can kind of work out of, $13,000 a year. That has actually led to a lot of blind people turning down raises, turning down additional hours, turning down promotions. I personally, 2 years ago, had to go to both of my bosses and say, I know you're paying everybody else who does this job $16 an hour. I need you to pay me $15. I know you're paying everybody who does this job. I know you offered me $17 an hour, $18 an hour. I need you to pay me $17. Yeah. I have had to ask my employers that and then explain to them, right, why I'm asking that question. So this would actually incentivize people to truly have those work benefits and be able to accept those by making that earnings cliff, shoving someone over the edge with that single dollar. We want to build a terrace, or we want to build a staircase, or whatever image you want to imagine, right? So for every $2 that I earn over that 2,830, I'm going to lose a dollar. So if I earn an extra 10, five is coming off of my benefit amount. So I would go down from 1,100 to 1095, right? Whatever that would be, which actually mirrors other Social Security programs that are currently in place. So that is kind of the big piece of Blind Americans Return to Work. And clearly that's one that I'm incredibly passionate about. You know, I've had to turn down a really nice offered raise as recently as 2 weeks ago because I sat down and I did the math. I want to take those things, but if I'm looking at, you know, I again did the math recently, I would have lost $6,000 to take the raise that I got at work. And you know, if I'm in a dual income household, someday if I ever decide I could put up with a man's nonsense for life, you know, maybe that's a hit that I can take. But right now, you
Yeah.
know, I'm in my 20s and I'm saving to buy a house or to move out or to do whatever. That's not a hit I'm willing to take. And frankly, I don't think it should be a hit that I'm asked to take. I think that's kind of BS. So again, you know, this has already been introduced in the House. We're trying really hard to get it introduced in the Senate. You know, if this is something that you can relate to, if this is something that you've experienced, or if this is something that you just have a passion for hearing about it, please go use your voice and make a difference because until we all scream at the top of our lungs, it's not going to happen. So
Yeah. Politicians don't like people with blindness and their white canes and their guide dogs protesting. It's a
no, it's not a good look.
it's not visually appealing for them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So
Interestingly enough, while we're talking about this, I'll give you a counter way that we do it in Australia, which is interesting.
mhm,
The blind pension in Australia, what we call a pension, which is kind of like SSDI and SSI,
mhm.
is the only pension that is exempt from um, being evaluated for income, other income. So, if you are classed as legally blind in Australia, which is a different thing to 2020, 2200, but it's 660. It's just meters to feet type of thing. Uh,
Yep.
and below 20% field of vision, you are classed as legally blind. And if you are classed as legally blind and you get the right certification from your eye specialist and get approved, then you are exempt from anything. So you could work a full-time job, you could earn $1 million, and you're still eligible for your blind pension, and you are still eligible for all the benefits that come with it, including free healthcare, and including free transport on buses, trains, and ferries in the country. And you're also eligible for half-price taxi vouchers as well.
Seeing that in and of itself is a whole nother podcast episode that we're going to talk about. And we're going to get a guest to come debate this with us because there are so many people who are of the mindset, and I am one of them, right? If I am low income, if I am not making a certain amount of money,
Yeah,
then I'm all about let's do the discounts,
yeah,
right? But if I'm making $150,000 a year and I can afford those things,
yeah.
that's when I'm like, why not pay for them? Right. Like
Right.
that's my right. I make more money than my parents, right? Or whatever that is. So
But it's
we're
interesting
gonna
the blindness in one country is
yes.
this, and they know that you have to pay extra money to do things like transport, and they subsidize that component. So you are able to go and
Yeah.
get a job, and you are able to go and have and now there's like another part to that, that's the National Disability Insurance Scheme, where you can go to your vocational counselor or the equivalent of that in an agency in Australia, and you can talk about what needs you have that are fair
Mhm.
and equitable, that you need to pay for outside because of your disability. And they
Yeah.
get support for things like additional training, equipment,
Yeah.
things like that. So it's just a very different way of looking at
Absolutely.
the world. And it seems like here, if you are low income, everything is geared around you continuing to be low income
Yeah.
without the ability to be able to move up into a middle class environment, which I absolutely despise. I
Yeah.
think that you should be encouraged to be able to work harder and earn more money. and that this is an incentive to stay at home for a certain percentage of the population and not seek employment. And further to that, even with discount housing, which is another big thing that everyone deals with, to qualify for discount housing, again, you need to be low income to be able to do that. So
And
that,
the second you earn too much money, you
yes,
can't live there anymore.
that's
And
right.
then instead of paying $900 a month, you're asked to pay $1,800 a month. And then they're like, why can't you make $1,800 a month work? I don't get it.
Right.
Oh, we're
These
going
are
to talk
the
about that.
challenges, right? But these are the things that honestly we have to change. We have to change the narrative on. We have to start talking about. We have to start educating people with blindness and low vision to be talking about, making them relevant to politicians. Like Lizzie said, write your politician. Say this is my circumstance. I'm trying to do the best I can, but as soon as I get to this point, I have to pay double for my housing and I lose all this income. And so, how am I supposed to make that, equitable for me? These are the issues that we need to shine a bigger light on.
And I think part of that too, Murray, right, is communicating with the people who are in power. So not only like this is touching my life, but again, if it's your kid, if it's your mom, if it's, I always joke, if it's your dog, right? But like probably not your dog.
Hopefully, it's
Um,
a guide dog too.
if you have that connection,
You didn't even laugh at that. That's not cool.
sorry, I didn't hear you. I'm on my soapbox.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said that. Hopefully, that's not your guide dog.
That would be really funny, actually.
That would be not good.
Um, blind guide dog. Anyway, no, I think, don't be afraid to advocate in your own communities, right? To those allies, to people who are able bodied but aren't low income, to your family, to your friends, to people you work with, ask them to raise their voices too. I don't see a problem with that. That is something I very much encourage. There is power in numbers. So don't be afraid. Like drop your questions, drop your comments. Let's have a real conversation about this, because unless we start bringing it into the light, come hell or high water, it's going to be the same, and we have to take it, right? Because the unfortunate thing is Congress also operates on a biannual calendar. So last February of 2025 started a new Congress, which means we only have until February of 2027 to get these bills passed before they have to be introduced again. So if ATAA, if Blind Americans Return to Work, if these things don't pass, we start all over again in 2027. And yes, we might have some fantastic people who are like, yep, this new bill, let's get it done, right? But every single one of those co-sponsors has to re-sign onto that bill.
Yeah.
If we can get it done, we want to get it done. We don't want to have to do it again next year. We want to bring new things next year, right? Let's talk about medical devices next year. Let's talk about higher education accessible instructional materials. Let's talk about all sorts of different things. Focus on this year. Um, and if you have to fly halfway across the country and risk climbing some really big snowbanks to do it, so be it. I think it's a pretty big flex. Our Iowa delegation, we had 4 people on our team. All 4 of us made it out to DC in spite of the weather. And all 6 of our offices, we have 4 House of Representatives members and 2 senators, of course. We didn't have a single appointment cancel or go virtual. So
That's
you can
awesome.
tell Midwesterners are hardy stock. We knew what we were getting into. And
You
it
might not listen to
shows.
podcasts though, but you travel the country,
It's true.
advocate. Good job.
Sure. It's true. So needless to say, right, us showing up to that building, to any of those buildings, to say this is what's important to me, it carries a lot of weight, because they see that it's harder to ignore when it's right in front of you.
Yeah.
So here, lobby, do good things, and come to Washington Seminar and hang out with me next year. That could be really
Yeah.
fun.
Absolutely. Like I was wanting to go last year and had to go back to
Yes.
Australia. I definitely wanted to go this year, but I'm doing this program in. I definitely would love to go to the Washington seminars. I think these are the really important things that we need to get behind. And there's processes as well. You want to talk about that, Lizzie, for if you're in an NFB chapter, in a state chapter, what the process is for putting your voice forward and being part of that process of talking about which bills to select and how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bills are actually selected by our national board. Our national board gets together twice in person annually. once in July at our national convention, and usually once around end of December, mid to end of December, for the annual board meeting at our headquarters in Baltimore, Maryland. So that's when we kind of find out what our pieces of legislation are. Of course, any of those folks would, I'm sure, be very, appreciative of hearing the things that their state members find important. Um, but at a state level, I mean, we talk about legislation at our chapter meetings. We talk about legislation. We have a legislative committee here in Iowa. And we actually have a state version of Washington Seminar. We call it our Day at the Capitol. I'm actually going to that for the first time next Tuesday. And we're talking about accessible voting and accessible prescription drug labeling. So, also two very important issues that are reflected on the state level, but not the national level. Here's what I will tell you though, is if you speak up and you ask those questions and you go to, let's say you're affiliate president, right? Maybe you're not super involved in a chapter. That gives that person a way to say, hey, we'd love to get you involved. Here's when our legislative committee meets. Show up to those meetings, learn something, right? Show them that you're serious about coming. Then usually, in Iowa at least, and I know this happens in other states as well, if for whatever reason you're not financially able to get from here to Washington, D.C., I've received state funding to cover my flight. I've received National Student Division funding to cover my hotel room, right? This year, I'm incredibly blessed to be a part of the Kenneth Jernigan Leadership and Service Program. So that's a National Federation of the Blind leadership cohort that actually helped me cover some of my expenses to go. So between that and my affiliate, right, I obviously contribute my time. I try and pay for different things along the way, but taking on $1,000 trip isn't something that everybody can do. So there's tons of ways to request that support. My challenge would be to you, don't just ask, show that you're willing to put forward the effort, right? Maybe it's, hey, I'd love to help schedule meetings. Maybe it's, hey, I'm really passionate about this bill. I'd like to take on learning about this bill to present, and then when they say, okay, let's hear it, be ready to go, right? Show up and do the work and show them that you are a worthwhile investment for your state. And you never know where that's going to take you. There's tons of opportunities out there to learn and to show that you're willing to do the work.
And it's also really good for your resume because,
yes.
I got a resume today where the person's in school and they're doing all this extracurricular activity. That tells me that one, you're reliable. Two, you're a go-getter and you want to get involved in things and you can do things on time with projects and meet people and engage with people. And so all these things that Lizzie's talking about, they're going to help you on your resume. They're going to help you feel more comfortable and confident in a job interview setting. So there's so many different advantages to be able to get involved and to be a part of this.
And there's actually a job seekers seminar in accordance with the Washington Seminar that actually happens annually. So if you are one of those folks who's looking to get a job and you'd like some of that face-to-face time, this year looked a little bit different, obviously because of the weather, but traditionally I've heard that that's a pretty slamming event. So definitely worth investigating. Like I said, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out, drop some comments. Murray knows where to find me. I'm not hard to find. We'd love to talk to anyone and everyone about it. Cause like I said,
when Lizzie says slamming event, she actually means it's really fun, really great. I don't know if that Midwestern terminology comes through.
I feel like slamming is not just Midwestern, but
it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
Get with the times, Grandpa.
All right.
I feel like slamming's actually from like the 80s.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'm pretty sure it's about the 60s actually, but anyway.
That's when my parents were born. That it's better than some of the things that I could say. But yes, now, awesome. Well, thank you all for letting me rant. I love that.
You do love that. I want you to talk about some memorable bills that you were a part of that got passed and put into motion.
It's a really interesting question. I think the one I'll share my favorite memory. It's not an exact replica of your question, but I'm going to go with it. Okay. So I talked about the Access Technology Affordability Act. ATAA has been around for a while. ATAA has not yet been passed. We've tried to get it into different omnibus bills. It just has not happened yet. Bolstering really good support right now, but we want to continue to see that grow. I will tell you though, a couple Congresses ago, honestly, probably 2017, maybe 2017, I think, the first year that I ever went. I went into my House of Representatives member's office, one of the guys from Iowa. we presented on this bill, and he says, hey, I know you guys are looking for a champion. I know you're looking for somebody to introduce this bill. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. And I kid you not, we walked out of that office and we were like, that's so great. He's really interested. This man, not one of his staffers, the actual member of the House of Representatives, ran after us down the hallway, 60, 70 feet. And he goes, guys, I made a decision. I want to champion this bill. Right. So it was just like this immediate, I just got chills. It was like this immediate, what we said mattered. And,
Yeah.
and we convinced him in less than 15 minutes
Nice.
that something we needed, something we were advocating for, was worth his time, and it was worth him sticking his neck out.
Yeah.
Chuck Grassley, one of Iowa's senators, has also been the champion for that bill at the Senate level. At various times throughout the last couple of years, we've had, different people on that bill. So I think that will always be one of my favorites. Another one that I will tell you hits really close to home for me is one that we're continuing to work on too. The Medical Device Non-Visual Accessibility Act. I don't believe it's quite yet been introduced in this Congress, but I could be mistaken on that. One of my best friends, her dad had a kidney transplant a couple years ago. And it was really incredible to hear her tell the story. The Medical Device Non-Visual Accessibility Act is important to me because, and it wasn't, oh, I have this condition and it's this personal impact for me. For Anna, it was always, I have to be able to take care of my dad. And if the equipment that I need to take care of my dad isn't usable, it doesn't have those tactile buttons, it doesn't have that audio feedback, and
Yeah.
I can't do it, I have literally been told that I am less of a human being because I don't deserve to take care of somebody that I love. Right.
Yeah.
And like, yes, somebody could come back and they could say, Anna, you have a mom, you have a brother, like let them do that. What if they're not there? Like
Right.
what if Scott needs something and Anna's the one that's home? Like
Yeah.
who gives the right or the say to say, Anna, you don't get to take care of your dad? Like it's just, these pieces of legislation are so immaculately important. And I think it's really impactful to hear people express why, right? Because everybody's why is unique. And that personal story is really what that lobbying piece is all about.
And I have to say, like, personal stories carry a huge weight. We
It's
have to tell more personal stories and have people understand.
yeah.
One thing that we're talking about right now in TikTok land, Lizzie, is
He says that like I'm not on the TikTok.
yeah, well, you're not engaged in blind talk, which is the blind community within
You're
TikTok.
right. I'm on hockey TikTok. Leave me
Yeah,
alone. Let
well,
me deal
what's
with my
going
rage.
on with the stand up? But importantly, like terms like legal blindness, for example, right? I'm of the belief that, okay, we need to be more literal when we talk about our blindness. So when I talk about my blindness, I talk about having low vision and having about 10% of useful sight. And because legal blindness is a term, but who knows what that means? If I went and surveyed 10 people in the street and said, what does legal blindness mean? They wouldn't be able to tell me. No one would be able to tell me. Right. So I feel like we have to do a better job of telling our story and bridging that gap, which is huge, to the non-disability community. And there's a thought that is like, okay, well, they should just learn. I just saw a TikTok that said, well, I'm employed and you don't understand my disability, so that's on you. And yes, partly that's true. But I think, being able to meet in the middle and have a conversation about what it is incredibly empowering and important, both for the person with blindness and also the person who doesn't have blindness. And we need to, again, change the narrative on this stuff and start talking about better ways to explain blindness that are practical and easily to be understood by people who don't know about it.
See, and I think that's interesting in and of itself, Murray, because I stray the complete opposite direction.
Yep.
I don't say 10% or 20% or 40% or 80%, frankly, because I don't know, right?
Sure.
I've
Yeah.
I've never asked a doctor, how much
Right.
vision do I have? Because I don't
It's
care.
It's
It's
amazing to me, Lizzie, to have so many people with blindness and low vision who have no idea about their visual acuity, their
mm-mm.
field of vision. I just don't. I don't get
See,
it.
and I could spit my visual acuity at you, but I am of the mindset, you know, nobody needs to know that. Like
Right.
it's blind to me is an all-encompassing term. And
Sure.
if somebody wants to make an assumption,
Yeah.
right? If I say I am a blind person and they want to assume that I am totally blind and I have no residual vision, that's not my beef. Like if until they get to a point where they feel comfortable asking me and I feel comfortable sharing that with them,
Yeah. It's
I don't really
individual
care.
for sure. Just for
So
me,
it's
I have less drama in explaining it that way for people to understand rather
mhm,
than saying, well, I'm legally blind, I don't care if you think that I can see more or less. But when you're working with people or when you
mhm.
are around people on a consistent basis, then it becomes more important, right? It becomes more important from a few issues. So,
I think that's debatable. I,
well,
I think in some cases it does, but I think in some cases, like I have coworkers that I've worked with for a year and a half who have no idea how much I can see.
right.
And it's different to me, like when one of my 10-year-old students asks me and they're like, hey, Miss Elizabeth, why are you not carrying your cane right now? Right. Hey,
Yeah.
I've walked around this environment enough times that unless something, really drastic has changed, I don't feel like I need it in this moment. But that's like a really good question, right? I've had an 11-year-old ask me that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think there's also a gender piece to it, right? I live in the world where as a woman, I don't want anyone to know anything that could be perceived as a weakness about
Yeah.
me because that could be taken advantage of, right? I,
And
I think it's heinous and ridiculous that people will see me on the street. And within, they don't even know my freaking name. And they're like, so how much can you see?
right.
Right? That's not your business,
Yeah.
until you know me well enough to know whether I'm not going to answer that, whether I'm going to answer a question with grace or not,
Yeah.
probably shouldn't ask the question.
Yeah.
But again, that really goes to our point, Murray, here of everybody's narrative is unique, everybody's
Sure.
story is unique. What one person is going to feel comfortable sharing with you, great. Another person is not going to talk to you about for 6 months.
Sure.
And I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. I think there's a my way and a your way and a their way and a his way and a her way and whatever. And that's okay. As we get comfortable with ourselves and our disabilities, we all stand to change. I used to say visually impaired. Now I say blind. It's totally just different.
Visually impaired is an interesting term.
Yeah,
A
it
very
is.
American term. The,
It
the,
is.
the rest of the world say vision impaired, but Americans say visually impaired.
We're not going to get into the semantics of language tonight because I am tired and I don't got that in me.
That's when I love to engage you though, because this is when the raw Lizzie comes out. I love it.
No, this is when Murray thinks he can win. So
It's
this
not about
is.
winning or
So
losing, Lizzie.
on episode
It's about
13,
okay. Episode 13. We have to do that on a
on
Friday.
episode 13, we'll talk about all the definitions of blindness.
We may not do another podcast until Halloween around the 13th, Friday the 13th.
That's true. I mean,
You
next
just
next
thought
week
about it.
is the 13th. So we have a 13th in I think 3 different months this year. I looked the
Oh,
other day. We have a Friday the 13th in February, we have a Friday the 13th in March, and I think we have a Friday the 13th in September, maybe. So
well,
we'll
I'll
see.
tell you what. For Friday the 13th, we have to talk about things that have been the scariest for us in our blindness. I think that's a good topic for Friday the 13th.
We'll see. February, March, we'll make it happen.
Make it happen. All
Yeah.
right, folks. Anything else, Lizzie? Thank you for your fabulous commentary on the Washington seminars. You're making a real difference. We're very
Absolutely.
pleased that you and NFB do the work that you do to represent the blind community.
Yeah. Join the team, friends. Join the team. I would say my resource share is those bills this week. I'm taking the easy out. Look them up, make a difference, use your voice.
My research share is join your NFB chapter and get
Woo!
involved in your state events and attend a national convention.
And a state convention. Like let's
Yes.
recognize, right? Sometimes national convention isn't always doable. Get involved. Go to a chapter meeting,
Yeah.
right? Chapter meetings are pretty fun depending on what chapter you're in. So don't be afraid to just like step in and be like, yo, here's who I am and here's what I want to do. And
My
if you don't know how to
chapter
connect with that person, call us.
my chapter in NFB in Washington State is a collaborative chapter because I'm on nowhere, and there's not any like people around. So I'm in a collective chapter, which is virtual.
Oh, like the at-large chapter in Washington State?
Yeah,
Nice, very cool. Yeah, I think that's a really good tool that the rural communities definitely get to tap into. So
yeah.
Google NFB of insert your state and then look for like chapters list and you'll either find one that's close to you or you'll very likely find an at-large chapter that you can hop online with too. So good
Ben.
groups.
Well, anything else, Lizzie?
All I got, boss.
All right, so that's it. That's a wrap for February 3rd. Did I get the date right?
It is February 3rd, and this
Oh,
is episode 12 of
episode 12.
Narrative.
Download it, tell a friend to download it. And if you're in Iowa, here's a challenge. I want you to close the gap on Washington State. We can't have this massive divide anymore.
You know,
Australia.
we'd
Come
be
on,
really
Australia.
worried.
You're
We'd be
letting
really
me
worried
down.
about the massive divide, but at first you called us Idaho. So like I don't think we're that upset.
It starts with I. Close enough.
Get out.
Bye, folks. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.